Hello, I am Radagast at your service. I mean that. Do my best to be of utility. Okay, so this is Mystic Brew. How about we're going to call it a seething purple cauldron? I still see the signaling of purple. I've been just kind of spending hours just looking at least chunks of the various interviews that go on in the morning shows and stuff. I can't really watch them all. That's a little more than there's just a little too much outside my reality, because the reality is in these things is kind of contrived. It's just, we all create our own reality. And when I look at these shows, I see them trying their best to create a reality, just like the media tried to create the reality that Hillary was the one who would win. And I keep on seeing Laura Ingraham demurring about her being press secretary, how, it's a great offer, but she thinks she would rather keep the job that she's done so well. And I know she's always wearing certain shades of purple, at least in recent days. Some of them go more towards red, some of them more towards blue. And I'm just keeping my eyes on the ties. And I think in certain cases, you might even find people will wear the color because now they know it's signaling. So some people might actually wear it to we'll call it a head fake. So I certainly see there is an attempt to bring the purple cauldron to a boil. I'm kind of feeling it's going to fizzle, thankfully. Not for want of trying, just for lack of participation. I did watch some clips of people like, I guess, Ben Shapiro trying to speak to college campuses, where the bulk apparently of college campuses are now inhabited by, I guess, what's known as SJW, or social justice warriors. And I am going to look into a crystal ball that's not really here in my hands and say that I think the SJWs are going to fail. Because what I'm seeing in the hysteria of this overreaction is that many people who, until like a week ago, probably consider themselves ardent SJWs, are now going, you know what, I'm for social justice, but I'm not for insanity. And so I think one of the reasons why I think the SJWs are going to fail a little bit is because they're actually turning off people in their own ranks. And you really can't do that. When you start alienating the people who are in your club, you've probably taken it too far. And one of the things that I hear in proponents of this is it's all about feelings. And I have done videos in the past, probably over a year old already, about feelings are an important data set for us to consider. It's probably one of the more important data sets to always heed. Information from our gut, which comes from a similar area, but usually maybe a little bit lower, is important data. The bacteria, if you have any left from eating GMOs and taking antibiotics, those bacteria are not hindered by our psychology. So they actually live in the kind of the etheric realm as far as perceiving the environment. And that's why your gut will tell you a lot about your environment. There's a certain telepathy or even seeing outside of time strictures. When you realize that time is a dimension and the bacteria kind of like live in a dimension of their own, they can give really vital information about things that you might be considering that maybe you shouldn't. So that's why you should listen to your gut. And in some cases, maybe even trust your gut. The emotions are a little more complex. they are often not reacting to the actual environment that the gut bacteria are. The gut bacteria are actually almost quite objective. But if you're going to take an action, they will take, since they live in your body, if you're going to do something that might affect them, they'll give you very good information. The emotions are a cauldron of their own. You want to know what's in that cauldron. You want to validate that you feel what you feel. No question about that. Your feelings are valid as data. Okay? Now we come to interpreting the data. That's what the third chakra, or your intellect or logic, does, is it takes the data and it looks at it in kind of a dry manner. Again, being as I'm Mod Whiz and I'm quite esoteric, and I mean, this is mystic brew. When I interpret things, I'm always interpreting them through a metaphysical reference point. The chakras are, and that's our subtle anatomy. Our subtle anatomy is as important as your heart or your liver is. And so there are a lot of people who might know of it. I mean, I'll never forget when I was at Omega and we had a yoga conference. And we had a lot of a lot of people who I think went into yoga because they didn't know what else to do. And so I get somebody on my table who had some enhancement surgeries. And I could, and I wanted to discuss something about chakras with her. This is a yoga teacher, okay? Eastern tradition. And I said, so you know about the chakras, right? And she goes, well, I've heard about them. Okay. So obviously when I'm referencing chakras, I might be speaking to a small portion of the audience. I'd like to think that, though, especially since I have such humble subscribers, that maybe they're more on board, and when I go there, they understand what I'm talking about. But anyway, with the social justice warriors, feelings are everything. There seems to be no responsibility for the higher chakra to have a look at what these feelings are, how they serve us in the long run, how they serve us in the now, and do they actually make sense? And this is kind of like about the cauldron. I'm not going to get into one of my chakra communication rants. But my prediction is that the SJWs, the social justice warriors, will fail. And again, I don't even, when it comes to warrior and war and things like that, I don't like the etymology of it, what the word roots are. I mean, even in a global mission to peace, when the ambassador first came out, almost 2 years ago, and he spoke about the war on ignorance and the war against financial tyranny, I have to always take the words and kind of, just look at, okay, when there's a war, what is the ordinance? What will be the projectiles? And I think I used that word yesterday in my Mystic Brew. And so, in the war on ignorance, the ordinance would be information. Hopefully as close to an objective concept of truth as possible. Personally, and the interesting thing is the ambassador is a Muslim, but he shies away from using a word which I think is much more appropriate. And this will certainly, being as I have been speaking, at least on the positive side of the election of Donald Trump, just like a lot of people are, including another very esoteric person, the Styx, Hex, and Hammer gentleman, young man. That again, we're not political. All this left, right stuff. That's schizophrenia to me. This is needing a label to have a discussion rather than just what are your ideas without a label. I think labels are really quite limiting. But anyway, the word I was getting to for instead of war, is an Arabic word. And this is an Arabic word that might not translate, jihad. Okay? Jihad means struggle. That is real. Jihad does not mean war. It means a struggle. Now, sometimes struggles will become armed struggles, in which case jihad amounts to people dying, which is usually something in most cases we really want to avoid. I'm, with the wisdom and compassion that comes into my heart, people dying is not something, or killing people. People die. Killing people is not something very high on my list of things I wish for or want to see. There are certain people that if they were to transition, we might say, oh, that might have been a good thing. Very different than killing people. And similarly, again, as I do have some kind of an esoteric background, to me, even doing any kind of energetic work towards creating those situations, no good. Which, of course, puts me somewhat at odds with John Lash's Kalika War Party. I do understand where he's coming from. I mean, again, we do have T cells in our body, killer cells, that occasionally will have to actually kill a pathogen, but it's not something to, look forward for. It's nothing to celebrate. It becomes a necessity. But making decisions about what necessities have to be done with such care and compassion. So I believe that the social justice warriors are going to turn that some of them within there, because again, when we say the SJWs, I mean, they're coming up in an education system where that is part of the education. They have college courses that prepare them to be social justice warriors rather than architects or designers, engineers. I mean, the current college curriculum, it still offers these things, but large amounts of them, it seems to me, a lot of people, because they can borrow and their parents support it and everybody thinks that they need a degree, they're and based on the behavior, it looks to me like these people are in college to avoid real life. And as many people come out of college very deep in debt and they go into real life, and they have to drive cabs and wait and be waiters and things like that. Not that being a waiter is the worst job in the world, but you could have probably saved on your college debt and gone to be a waiter. And that's the whole thing is, again, you pay for something, you get the paper, and then you go out with that paper, and then you end up in a job that you did not need the paper or the debt for. So, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. And to me, one of the greatest contributors to cognitive dissonance is picking a side, where data streams come in and one looks to either qualify them or disqualify them rather than just looking at the data sets that come in through our various perceptive abilities. Some of them will be intuition, more from a third eye kind of intuition. Some of them will come in from our heart, which to me is actually the universe, source, God speaking to us. Some of us will be in our third chakra where our logic is operating. But because of one of the other things about subtle anatomy is that the first three chakras are actually part of a package. Even though they each have a function, they function as a package for a basic human being, a human being that has a cerebral capacity, but not necessarily a spiritual capacity. It's not until you move into the heart that your spiritual capacity is awakened and you start to identify as how we were created as extensions of the Creator. So I really think that the social justice warriors are going to ultimately fail because they're going to have people in their own midst going, enough is enough. Again, it's like we care about other people's feelings, but now we're acting rabidly and in a way that is any, the word's escaping me, any capital, okay, like ideological or political capital that we had, we're squandering by looking like lunatics. It's really hard to be taken seriously when you're coming completely from your emotional plane and not from your intellectual plane. Like to me, I mean, when I listen to these people, their language is devoid of concepts, and all the language is about feeling and how people feel. And again, compassion requires that you understand how people feel, but that's a reading. It's not a demand that you have to, how you have to operate. Now, obviously, in the name of social cohesion, we take these things into account, but not to the point of enabling. If anybody knows anything about people who have drug problems, abuse problems, whatever, everybody should be fairly aware of what being an enabler is. And that's somebody who in the case of a husband or wife who has a drinking partner, and you see they're drinking again, and you just decide, whatever. I understand your stress, or I hope you get help. Basically, you don't kind of say unacceptable. Okay, you don't. When something that you think is unacceptable and you don't put it into your voice chakra, you don't put it into your will and say this is unacceptable, you enable. And so I just, we see a lot of enabling going on with the SJWs. And now, as somebody, this is largely about. So I'm speaking a little bit. I'm calling it looking into a purple cauldron. But these SJWs are the heat in this cauldron. There'll be no movement. There'll be no purple revolution without this group. The purple revolution is based on this group adopting the insidious thoughts that came in. Now, it's really interesting because somebody gave me a good perspective. I'm 63 years of age. When I was in 1969, kind of a pivotal year. That's when Woodstock, the festival, happened. I was 16 years of age. And towards the later part of 16 years of age, let's say I had done a certain ritual that changed things. And I don't mean a magic ritual. I'm talking about a very basic kind of ritual, but is not really pertinent here. But of course, it certainly changes one's perspective. But I do remember when we had certain, I guess, like weathermen or other kinds of political things that at the time we didn't know were part of almost a communist type of ideology. Trotskyite might be a better word, but it's kind of like basically an ideology that was at the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. And I remember, again, we grew up, we were, the sexual liberation and all that stuff. And a lot of us guys refer to women as chicks. That was just what we called. And I remember going into this place one time, and maybe they were selling incense in there too. And I don't know, I referred to some chick that said to me, and they got all over me. And I realized, and I remember saying, hey man, it's like I'm not dissing them. Oh yes, you're. So I took it into consideration. But what I kind of realized was they were telling me that there was offense where in my own group, there wasn't offense. These people basically came in and started telling us what was offensive without it being an organic rising within ourselves that we said, ooh, In other words, we weren't getting feedback from our chicks about calling them chicks. Instead, I had some older man telling me about how I was uncool, and there was an older woman telling me also that I was uncool. So this kind of, I see now how any movement, in this case it was the hippie movement, had all kinds of pernicious influence come into it. If we now look at Tavistock and many of our great musicians, although the artistry was there, you start seeing there was a certain amount of subversion. And I think part of the subversion of that was about kind of thinking we could just disregard the cultural milieu we were in without just discounting it. Like the integration. It was like, no, you will accept us, blah, 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 blah. Now, there was a certain amount of success. Johnny Carson grew his hair a long time. Snyder, you might not, some of you younger people, if I have any younger viewers, might not know who these people were. But I mean, they went from, having the old howdy doody type of haircuts to, almost their ears disappearing. My father, a lifelong Republican, grew his hair out. And then later on in his life, when that cultural influence passed, everybody kind of returned to presenting themselves either as they wanted to or as their job demanded. Well, I won't get into that. I want to stay on here as much as possible. So anyway, so I'm apolitical, really. I believe in human politics where there is a natural politics where, again, but we even at the personal level, we have to make sure that we don't really fall into cliques that don't want to talk to other cliques. Without dialogue, we're lost. Anybody who's ever heard me knows I use the body as the idea of what is the most wise way for us to interact with each other. I don't choose, because to me, body is human nature. Nature revealed to us in how we should be. And in the human body, you see a body that works with each other. All the different parts work. There's communication now. Science understands that there's communication at the neural and chemical level. But they usually discount the whole kind of energetic level. But even at the neural and chemical level, the body communicates with itself. At any time that the body can't communicate to a part, that part will fall into dysfunction, and sometimes, in certain cases, even have to be cut off or get diseased. Communication is is essential to proper functioning. Without communication, you get dysfunction. So even though there is a natural politics amongst human beings, even at that level, we have to guard against. When it becomes institutionalized politics, to me, we have a sick system. We have a dysfunctional system. Is a system that plays off of divisions, and I don't think that's good. And again, when I'm speaking of the social justice warriors, they named themselves that. I'm not calling them that. That's their identification tag. And again, I'm not even trying to come out against that they want to be more compassionate. I understand that. But again, to me, compassion is part of your heart. Wisdom means not only do you use your third chakra, you've even risen above that into your heart, where instead of logic, you use wisdom. And so I think that there is very little wisdom in the social justice warrior movement. I just see a lot of emotionality that in many ways is a lower form of compassion. And compassion is really a component of wisdom. And they're not indulging in wisdom because they can't. When you speak to them, you do not hear even the third chakra really being engaged very much, other than the formation of words. And much of the words that come out are programs. This isn't like organic thought. It's regurgitation, which is what Common Core, which has been around for at least since the No Child Left Behind, that whole movement, is about remembering things And then when a question is asked, you give the answer you were given to the question. There isn't the nuance that is part of, to me, higher human functioning. And so let's just talk about Trump for a second, because he is now the president-elect of the United States, and personality that needs to be dealt with. As somebody who thinks that the World Wide Web has been a kind of like the way for us to engage in kind of what would be the equivalent of almost world telepathy in a way. I mean, again, there's still language differences, but still the way that we can communicate in real time or almost instantaneous time via the World Wide Web, to me, has been a great thing. And so now that we have kind of like the first president who did a World Wide Web campaign, of course, I mean, that's really where the strength of it was, and the various YouTubes and Alex Jones and just numerous commentators who were really just kind of, to me, bringing good reasoned argument into the mix. And again, when you're dealing with two people, there's decisions to be made, even if you think both people weren't qualified. So anyway, what I think is interesting is some of the political considerations that is now the talk of what's going on politically. And of course, the normal distortion that occurs when you put a magnifying glass and in some case, a microscope. And then, of course, there's also snippets where there are full sentences or paragraphs that are needed for context, and we get either a sentence or part of a sentence, and then we're supposed to extrapolate the true meaning from this snippet, when in fact the true meaning was in how it was delivered. So I think that a lot of the people that are currently being bandied about, I'll mention a few particularly egregious names in my opinion. I think it's John Bolton, the guy with the walrus mustache, who in my opinion is quite a Looney Tune and quite belligerent, and belligerent isn't good. Then you have Giuliani. He's a dubious character on a lot of things, not everything, but oh please. And then we have Mitt Romney. That apparently these are all people, I guess, who've been considered for Secretary of State. I personally think these are head fakes. I think this is what we're observing as what would be called Sun Tzu's art of war, and all war is deception. And so I think that a lot of Trump's signaling right now is false signals. And also then of course, but there's also the data gathering. You send out a false signal, you listen to the chatter, and you get the data on it. And then when you finally make a real decision, you have data streams on all these different personalities. And again, there's the right person for the job, but there's also how will that right person be perceived. So I see a lot of really intelligent stuff going on here. And and I think part of it is to keep the purple cauldron from coming to a boil. And like I said, I certainly see, if you take the imagery of a cauldron, I certainly see wood being inserted in there, but it looks to me like some of that wood's turning out to be a little rotten, a little bit wet, and a lot of smoke, but not as much heat as those who wished to create a bubbling revolution are getting. I feel the latency of it, but I just think it's not going to succeed. And I guess that would be the good news. And I think I think I can call, I don't know how exciting this was. I think it was more thoughtful. But again, I'm a thoughtful person. I don't even look to necessarily go for exciting, misleading titles to my mystic brews. I've been working on the Cauldron theme a little bit because there is this, there is a seething motion going on. So I just feel like when I'm talking about current political events, that the Cauldron is an apropos symbol for me to use. Because that whole, boy, I could have said pot, but I'm not whiz. I'm going to say Cauldron. All right. God bless you all. Be well.